the sun has finally gone down, let me welcome you to this video of the Nottingham Ghost Hunt. I hope you'll enjoy this video and learn a lot about the world of ghosts. Not just where they haunt, but perhaps why they haunt, and different types of ghosts. And maybe by the end of our stories, you will be a little bit more interested and intrigued, and perhaps a little bit less frightened by this parallel dimension that's around us all the time. I will be accompanying you on your tour around the old streets of Nottingham, 1,000 years old in this area, and you may even see me as we go round. Enjoy the tour.
Right then, ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
And welcome to the intellectual alternative to TV every night. This is the Nottingham Ghost Walk. My name is Simon. It's my great pleasure to be your guide for the rest of this evening. Now, before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. We shall this evening be taking a short walk around this part of Nottingham's ancient city centre. Now, as we are doing the ghost walk, we shall stop at various places where I shall give you the ghost tales of Nottingham, both old and new. Now, as we are wandering the city streets together, I know from many, many years of experience that there will be some people who have questions. In almost every single group that I've ever taken out in the 9 or 10 years that I've been doing this ghost walk, there is at least one person in that group, one person standing alone, one person who, even as we speak, is suffering from deeply personal, embarrassing problems of a paranormal variety and is just itching to speak to an expert. Well, now is your opportunity. If you have questions about ghosts, hauntings, mediumship, psychicism, the occult, witchcraft, druidism, folklore, myths, legends, anything like that, I shall only be too happy to answer your questions. Now, this walk is nothing if it is not educational. So let us begin your education in the ways of the other world with lesson number 1. Now, what is the other world? The other world was a term coined by our Celtic forebears more than 2,000 years ago. It describes a place which is in the same place that which we stand. It is in the same time in which we live. Yet most of you will never, ever see it. And for most of you, you should be grateful for that. Now let us take our imaginations a little bit further, shall we? Any gentlemen here tonight? Gentlemen, just imagine that you were alive and living 250 years ago. Living still in Nottingham or around abouts, and you were coming out for a night on the town 250 years ago, and you were wandering up or down Castlegate here in period costume, perhaps with one of your close personal friends, as indeed you may well do today. Or gentlemen, if you had have been wandering up and down this street at night 250 years ago, you would no doubt have been on the lookout for a little bit of, how should I put it, night times entertainment of the feminine variety. And you would have found it behind this very door here, because in its heyday, this street was one of Nottingham's very, very first red light districts. And this place here was a very, very successful knocking shop indeed. The people who worked throughout this building on all floors began to notice that this place was also home to a lot more beetles, bugs and cockroach-like insects than we might normally consider healthy to have running around the place. So a company of pest exterminators was brought in to deal with that problem. The pest exterminators went through the building room by room by room, but they could find nothing. Not a beetle nor a bug was to be found there. Finally, towards the end of the day, they were at last allowed access to this one office above the doorway here. Sure enough, within a few minutes of being gained access there, one of the workers has managed to locate some kind of unidentified, small but solid mass trapped within the wall cavity of the old room. A couple of minutes later, with a hammer and chisel in hand, that worker has managed to create a hole inside the old lath and plaster walls of that room. As soon as the hole is big enough, he casts his hands into the darkness of the wall cavity and he gropes around for that unidentified solid mass. His fingers touch it. He takes hold and he drags it out into the cold light of day, and to his dismay, what he finds he's holding there is not an insect nest at all. But what he has in his hands is the very ancient, mummified remains of a very small baby indeed. Now this child, this tiny, tiny infant, had been embalmed and mummified from head to toe. It was still wrapped in the tattered old remains of a woolen shawl and still had a silk bow tied around its forehead. So whomever had done this to the child had obviously taken a lot of time and care and loving attention to ensure that the job was done correctly and that the body did not corrupt and decay over the centuries of entombment it was to insuffer within the walls of that room. Now, the pest exterminators immediately called in the local police. The police took the body, guessed at its quite vast age, and passed it on into the hands of the county coroner, who proclaimed that this child had met its death around about 2 to 2.5 centuries before, of causes unknown. The coroner identified the child as a girl. Finally, the child was passed into the care of a local vicar. The vicar then christened it and gave it a proper burial and funeral with all the ceremony and solemnity that we would associate with that. And as soon as that had happened, as soon as the body had been dealt with correctly in a spiritual manner, all hauntings or strange atmospheres within that room ceased. To this day, that office room is just the same as any other office anywhere else in the world. Now you may well be wondering, at this point in the story, where is the ghost? What's the ghost story there? Well, to answer that question, we must go some way towards reconstructing the events that led to the child being there. History has not recorded them for us, but our best guess is that one of the young ladies who worked this establishment in its heyday possibly found herself in the family way, as was something of a risk back then with the oldest trade in the world. She could have kept that secret though. She could have worn bigger and bigger dresses to hide the growing fact, until finally her time came and she locked herself away all alone in secret in a room above the doorway, and went finally through the pain of childbirth all alone. When finally that child was either stillborn or fell victim to infant mortality so rife back then, she could have kept its birth, its life and its subsequent death an entire secret by embalming the child up and entombing it within the very walls of the room where quite possibly she could have spent a good deal of the rest of her days. And if we consider that scenario from the point of view of the very immature earthbound spirit or ghost which is now trapped there, it is believed that when we die and we wake up dead on the other side with a sudden and shocking realisation that we are a ghost, that we take over with us pretty much the same kind of knowledge and intelligence that we had during our lifetimes on earth. And if we consider that from the point of view of this very immature spirit which now resides there, that spirit, that infant child's ghost, would never have had the knowledge to know that to produce a physical apparition could have got its message across. It never learnt to talk, so it couldn't talk to the living from beyond the grave, and it certainly never had the kind of physical strength necessary to cast heavy objects around the place in the manner of, say, a poltergeist. All that was left to this infant spirit will be to reflect the very basic, raw emotions and feelings of sadness and sorrow and of loss, which must have been apparent at the time of its birth, its short life and subsequent death, whence it was entombed within the walls of that room to go on giving out these waves and waves of sadness until finally the body was discovered, and most importantly, as I've already said, the spirit was laid to rest. So hopefully, ladies and gentlemen, for a first tale that teaches us some of the very many diverse and often very subtle ways that hauntings can and do take place in this world. A haunting doesn't have to be some kind of dreadful, blood-drenched, decapitated monk that terrorises your nearest medieval castle. A haunting doesn't have to be a banshee-like scream that erupts across the North Yorkshire moors on your walking holiday. It doesn't have to be even an irate poltergeist who casts your latest DVD at you across your living room. A haunting can be as simple as walking into any given room, any given place in the world, and as you feel the hackles on the back of your neck rise up, and you get that distinct animal impression that someone, somewhere there is watching, even though you are completely and utterly alone.
Continuing our search for ghosts in Nottingham, we now move on to the trip to Jerusalem, a pub which we know dates back to 1189, and so is perhaps one of the oldest pubs in the country. If there's going to be any ghosts in Nottingham, they really ought to be found here. This room we're in now is actually one of the original rooms which is cut onto the cliff under Nottingham Castle. Now with me is the manageress and licensee here for about the last 5 years, Claire Underdown. But in her time in this pub, she's experienced one or two things that you might not have enjoyed. Claire, would you like to tell us what you've seen?
Normally the regular things are our gas gets turned off down in the cellar and then we're unable to serve any beer. We think a barrel has gone or perhaps the gas is naturally gone. Go down there, just turn the nozzle and in fact it's just actually been turned off. Now that does happen pretty regularly, maybe once a fortnight as such. We just get used to that, switch it back on and away we go. There's also things in the cellar where you always seem to see things in your peripheral vision. But then you think perhaps, oh, it's just a water dropping down, but then when you actually see something maybe a bit more substantial, that's when we thought, oh, there's definitely something here.
Did you ever hear of any previous tenants? Did they tell you any stories, or did they obviously not mention that, so not to put you off coming to the pub?
No, there's always been legends and mysteries and stories surrounding the trip. Some I think, it's like Chinese whispers. It starts off. Yes, there is a tale there and there is some truth behind it. But as it comes down the years, it gets changed, it gets elaborated on, and it totally gets all blown out of proportion. We have like the cursed galleon, which is up on the top bar there. And that hasn't been cleaned for roughly about 55 years now, I think it is. But the story behind that is the last 3 people who cleaned it all died a violent death within a year of cleaning it. Again, I don't know where that information has come from, unfortunately. All I know it's just been passed down the line, but no one's actually really said anything extremely scary about any presence or ghosts, perhaps, just the odd little occurrences that happen.
We're now at the Old Vic on Fletcher Gate, and with me is Wendy. A lady who's worked here for a few years, and on many occasions has experienced sightings of a lady ghost who seems to frequent the pub. Wendy, would you like to tell us your experiences?
Yes, there was one morning when we used to have the keys then before management lived there in the flat, and we was locking up to go home, and I looked at the monitors, and we could see a ghost sat at a table like it was having a drink. So when we opened the doors, there was nobody there, so I locked up again, and then again looked at the monitors, and it had got up and it was walking to the bar like it wanted to get served. So I got a bit freaked out, so I just run out, locked the doors and went in. Then there was another occasion that I looked at the monitors again, and she was stood in the doorway of the ladies' toilets downstairs, and she was leaning on a wall. But when you went down, you could never actually see anything when you went down to have a look. We'd only ever seen her on the monitors. Then there was another time, and we looked at the monitors again, and she was sat on a stool downstairs. Me and the manager had gone down to have a look. And the manager says, oh, get out of the pub. So when we come back and looked at the monitors again, she'd left. Then we've heard keys jangling and running up the stairs, and there's only been me and my daughter here.
When you've seen the ghost, Wendy, do the shows appear the same, or is it the same?
Yeah, it's always the same. She's always got the same sort of clothes on. It's not one of the really big old-fashioned Victorian hats what we used to wear, and the really big long flowing cloak she's got on. And
you seem to tell me that you think that she seems to disappear for a short period of time, every time there's a change of management.
yeah, and every time there's a change of management, she'll disappear for about a month, 6 weeks, and then you'll hear her walking around, and you'll hear barrels being moved in the cellar, and when you go and have a look, there's nobody there.
I wonder if it's perhaps an ex-landlady like that that likes to get used to the new staff coming in before she accepts them.
Probably, it could be that.
You say you've actually seen the ghost on the closed circuit TV monitors?
Yeah,
And could you identify it as the same person?
yeah. It was the same person every time we've seen it.
So the ghost doesn't really realise it's being spied on at the same time, is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Jenny Bright, and welcome to my ghost tour. We're outside the Rotunda in Nottingham. At one time, this actually used to be the General Hospital. And really, I suppose this is where the ghost stories really started. I was called in one day to a lady that was working on the top floor of this hospital here, and she was working for a charity. It had been closed down as a hospital and had not yet been taken over as offices and this lovely pub that you can see now. At night, she used to have to work late, and she was sitting there with her office door open, and all of a sudden she heard a door open. Now, she knew she'd locked this door, and footsteps were coming slowly and purposely down the corridor. She'd got a door of her office open so she could see. The papers in the corridor flapped as somebody came by. The footsteps came by and receded. Another door creaked and nothing. Now she got quite used to this, and this was not why she called me in. Other things started to happen. When the footsteps started to be heard, the coffee machine would switch on, the fax machine would switch on, and all of a sudden it went icy cold. This she could not cope with. So she knew that I did this sort of thing, and she knew I wouldn't laugh at her, and so she came to me and asked if I could help. Well, of course I could. So I brought David, my partner, one evening, and she was, really shaking. She said, this is about the time that it starts. David went into a room just ahead of me, and as I went into the room, he was looking out of the window. Behind him was this ghostly figure of an old lady. She looked about 90, and she was looking over his shoulder. So I thought, aha, I wonder if it's you. So mentally, I tuned into her, and mentally I said, hello, what are you doing? She whizzed round, looked at me, and came towards me, pushed me into the wall, and shot out of the door, and her footsteps could be heard going down the hall. David immediately turned round, and he says, have you fallen over something? I says, no, but I have been pushed by a very strong old lady. We charged out, and I could just see her going down the corridor. Mentally again, I tuned into her, and I said, come on back. What are you doing? What are you doing? She was so surprised that I could tune into her, and I could tune into her because I not only am a psychic, I'm a medium as well, and I can get on their wavelength. She came towards me, and I said, what's happening? She says, well, I don't know. I've been here for such a long time. They brought me in here, and I died here. And I was confused when I came in, and I'm even more confused now. Should I keep seeing a light, but I don't go towards it in case I get even more confused? So I'm staying here, and nobody's listening to me. I keep trying to make my presence known. So I said, okay, did you have a husband? Yeah, Harry. And I said, is it all right if, we try and get in touch with Harry and he'll come for you? I don't see how, but I said, let me try. So I asked for the angels and the spirit beings to bring her husband, and slowly their little light appeared. Now she must have been able to see Harry, but all I could see was a little spirit light. And she said, he's there. And immediately she vanished in a puff, just like that. Nothing has been heard, and no footsteps have been heard, and nothing's happened since. So I hope that her and Harry are fine, and that I was able to help them in some way. You see, ghosts sometimes just want somebody to listen to.
Hi, I'm Jason Stevenson, the licensee of the Rotunda. It used to be the old General Hospital here in Nottingham. There's various spooky little stories, what keeps going on, and it's ongoing. This particular door is one of the main doors what spooks seem to use. One particular incident when my head barman was sitting at the bar with his girlfriend, and a puff of smoke and a bang, it was just like the door was slamming, and two guys came through, came out of this puff of smoke. My barman thought it was the smoke machine on, but it takes 15 minutes for the smoke machine to heat up, so it was proof that it wasn't the smoke machine. It was very strange how it happened. I was in the cellar at the particular time when it happened. Guys came through the doors, through the smoke, and walked straight through the bar, and never to be seen again. Didn't even look at my head barman and his girlfriend or anything else. He just walked straight through, and out they went. That is just one of the many spooky stories and experiences. There's always creaks, walks, people walking around, footsteps, especially late at night. And if you'd like to come along, come and have a drink, you never know, might see one. Thank you.
We're now in the famous Long Gallery at Nottingham Castle. There have been many, many ghost stories attributed to this castle. With me is Pete Barnsdale, who has been attendant here for over 32 years, and he is going to recount to us a couple of stories that he can actually guarantee are fact.
One of the most memorable stories of all the stories here was in 1970, on the 26th of August, in this very long gallery, was to be an incident that happened that is quite unusual and quite strange, and frightened 2 men nearly to death. The incident started at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock in the early hours of the morning, the 2 attendants, the 2 guards, were to come through this gallery with a dog. As they entered into the gallery, which was half lit, because of using all the power and the electricity, only very lowly lit, as they were talking and coming into the gallery, the dog they were with suddenly pulled heavily onto them and started to bark and bolted backwards and disappeared. At this, they actually believed there was a burglar or burglars actually in the gallery. Going to their pockets for slip truncheons that they carried in their trousers, they raised their truncheons and started to walk down the famous long gallery. It is 1970. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and they believe they've got an intruder. In the low-lit gallery, they started to proceed down the gallery with their truncheons raised, hoping to find somewhere to correct them and sort them out and ring the police and do all the things they would be normally doing. But they were faced by a strange phenomenon, a strange image. For down the gallery there, right in the very far corner, suddenly out of the wall shot a great ball of light the size of a football or maybe a little more. And it shot right up into the roof space to the other side and bounced down the gallery. And was bouncing and bouncing and bouncing, and they were stunned to see the strange sight as the light was going side to side. Everything, all the shadows were moving in the gallery, and this strange ball of light made about 7 to 8 arcs. But suddenly as it went up into the roof space, it came sailing down to about this high from the ground, when bang, it snapped. The gallery had become alive with sparkles, and they were absolutely stunned. Their mouths were tingling, their lips were tingling, and they did not know what they were faced with. They very gradually backed out of the gallery and made a bolt to the door, where they went down the stairs to the main office, and they rang the police. Now you've got to imagine the desk sergeant that night as he gets a call from Nottingham Castle to say that they found a ghost. He explains the ghost. Okay, we'll send somebody up. Now the 2 men had experienced something that was very strange and very unusual, and one of them was so upset he was almost going to a very deep shock. When the police arrived, they came into the gallery and thought it to be a little bit of a joke and passed it over as a bit of fun. But the nightmen, they'd seen some here that night that could not just be explained off. One of the nightmen was so upset with this that he actually went off ill. He had said, I'll have to go, I can't be here any longer, and the policeman had to stay on site to back up the security for the night. Whatever was seen here that night, we'll never know surely, but something came through this building that really frightened 2 men near to the point of death. So what happened here, we'll never know for sure. There is no answer, no scientific answer as such yet, but something passed through here. From down there, it came crashing through and bouncing till it came to about here.
Statue here. Right then, ladies and gentlemen, now, if there is one story out of all the many, many ghost stories I've ever told, if there is one story which members of the general public will take home with them, then this is it. Now, many of the stories on the Ghost Walk are really quite ancient. So, in many ways, they're frightening, yes, they're spooky, but they are ancient. They maybe don't affect us in our lives in this modern society, but this one may ring a few bells for you. This is a tale of Nottingham Castle, only being now around about 10 to 15 years old at the most. Now, around about that time ago, in the early hours of the morning, maybe about 2 or 3 o'clock, all of a sudden the alarm bells inside Nottingham Castle shatter the pre-dawn stillness of the castle security office. The security staff who are on duty there 24 hours a day, every day of the year, leap to attention. There, on the control panel in front of them, one small red light is flickering madly away. The position of that red light indicates exactly where in the castle the break-in has occurred. At the same time, though, as that alarm rings out in the castle security office, an identical alarm which is connected to it rings out in the nearest police station, around about quarter to half a mile that way at Canning Circus. The police can then duly send out a police officer to deal with the break-in. Sure enough, within a couple of minutes of the alarm shattering the silence in the castle, one of the castle security guards has rushed down to the gatehouse across the way from us there. He stands up and undoes the large black wooden gates of the gatehouse, and there, standing waiting for him on the other side, is a police officer. And with him, that police officer has brought the biggest, baddest Alsatian police dog in the whole of Nottingham City. A great wolf-like, slavering brute of a dog that enjoys nothing more than taking the odd snack on the odd limb of the odd criminal, and God knows there's enough of them. Anyway, from the gatehouse, The two men and the dog proceed through the castle grounds and into the castle until they find themselves standing outside the large wooden doorways of the gallery, behind which they expect to apprehend their intruder. The security guard opens the doors and proceeds in first. He's immediately then followed by the police officer and police dog. Once inside, the police officer lets the dog off its lead and allows it to run at will around the room to try and flush out the would-be burglar. At the same time, the police officer and security guard now carry out a torchlight examination of the gallery to see what they can uncover. However, after several minutes' careful examination by the two men and the dog, it soon becomes painfully apparent that there is not another living soul within that room. The police dog has been completely unable to sniff out any kind of burglar, and the security guard and the police officer can find no sign of any break-in even having occurred in the first instance. So, the two men shrug their shoulders. They assume that something must have gone wrong with the alarm system, and quite literally on this occasion it has set itself off. The police dog, now severely disappointed in missing out on a snack, is popped back on its lead, and along with the security guard and the police officer, they begin to leave the gallery. Now, on their way out, and out of simple idle curiosity perhaps, the police officer shines his flashlight beam onto one of the many exhibits on show that night. Nothing special about it. This is merely a large oil painting, a picture of a racehorse painted around about the turn of the 19th to 20th century. However, as soon as the policeman's flashlight beam makes contact with that painted canvas, a very strange series of events begins to take place. Straight away, as if in instant reaction, all of the lights within the gallery flash on simultaneously, and the entire gallery is suddenly bathed in bright white light. This is immediately followed by a very, very shocking and dramatic loss of air temperature. Within the space of a split second, the air temperature plummets down to a very, very frosty, icy cold level, so much so that the breath from the two men and the dog now begins to cloud and condense very, very thickly upon the suddenly frigid air. And thirdly, finally, and strangest of all, is the very peculiar reaction to all of this by this highly trained black Alsatian police dog. Very, very suddenly, very, very violently, the dog rears up on its hind legs. Its ears lay flat against its skull. Its hackles rise. It begins to froth at the mouth and bark and growl very, very ferociously at this one seemingly harmless painting. Yet despite all of this, despite the lights flashing on of their own volition, the inexplicable loss of air temperature, and the very strange reaction of this highly professional black Alsatian police dog, there is still nobody there to arrest. No crime has actually occurred that night. So the police officer drags his irate police dog out of that gallery behind him, and he's very swiftly followed by a now considerably more nervous security guard than the chap who first went in. He slams the door shut and locks it swiftly behind him, and nothing more is heard of these strange events for the rest of that night. Indeed, nothing more is heard of these events until about halfway through the following week. Now, about halfway through the following week, around about lunchtime in fact, we find the same officer of the law who was witness to those strange events is now on his daytime patrol. Around about lunchtime, his daytime patrol brings him within the vicinity of the castle here, and as that officer of the law feels his stomach rumble, he decides that now is the time to patrol the castle tea rooms. So, as that officer of the law is taking his afternoon break, whom should wander in but the exact same security guard who was with him the previous week. The security guard immediately recognised that police officer and wandered over to chat, and during the course of their conversation he brings up the subject of those strange events that occurred the previous week. The police officer went on to explain that those events they witnessed may well turn out to be a lot stranger than either of them had first expected, because the very following morning after those events had taken place, upon returning to the police station at Canning Circus at the end of his patrol and taking his dog out of the van, he discovered that literally within a couple of intervening hours of leaving the police, within a couple of intervening hours of leaving the castle and arriving back at the station, that all of his dog's jet black fur had now turned entirely and without exception to light grey and white, and to the end of its days that dog was no longer a black Alsatian police dog, but remained a silver grey all over.
We're now in the Bell Inn off Market Square in Nottingham, and with me is Paul Jackson. This pub has been in Paul's family for over 103 years, and during that time, many an eerie tale can be told. Paul is here to tell us one or two of the experiences that he can personally remember during his career in this old pub.
I think the first thing I can do is to introduce my grandfather to you. Robert Jackson, looks a bit like Winston Churchill there. He was spotted by one of the barmaids walking through the wall in the snack bar, which is the bar is pictured in there. She was up on a ladder cleaning a shelf and felt a sensation of someone coming behind her, turned around and saw him walk straight through the wall. His mother and one of his older brothers, I heard having an argument one night after closing time. Bear in mind that these people have been dead for 60 odd years, and came down to investigate what was going off, and couldn't find anything. Came back up to the office and unlocked the door, and all the pictures and calendars were moving like somebody had just brushed past them. And then I got a very strange sensation up the back of my neck, and decided I'd better get tidied up and get out as soon as possible. In the restaurant where we are now, up in the top corner there was two gentlemen in Edwardian dress who somehow or other appear during lunchtime and then disappear before they have a chance to pay. The waitress gets quite upset that she's not got any money out of them yet. And then back in about 5 years ago now, we had a promotion with the Shy Horse Society promoting Bob Champion's ale. He was the national hunt jockey who recovered from cancer and went on to win the Grand National, and the Shy Horse Society named a beer after him called Champion's Ale, and we were chosen by the Shy Horse Society to come and launch it. And the lady who organised it told me afterwards that she'd seen what I can verify as my great-grandmother walking through the wall in the ladies' loo, which gave her quite a start, obviously, when she was on the way down to use the facilities herself. But this made quite a lot of sense to me because the kitchens used to be down there, and the lady concerned was carrying a tray of food back through the wall. And I hope she made it to the loo in time. That's about all I can remember.
Well then, ladies and gentlemen, here we are back upstairs at the Salutation to finish off for the evening. Now, many years ago when I first started the Ghost Walk, it occurred to me, after just a few really, that after an hour or so of wandering the city streets and talking about some of the quite most medieval and macabre ways of dying and asking questions about whether we'd even be lucky enough to become a ghost, I worked out quite early on that the general public on the Ghost Walk could in fact leave the Ghost Walk feeling a lot more depressed than when they first came on it. I decided that this probably wasn't good for business, so I made a promise to myself that each and every Ghost Walk night, that at the end of the evening I would come up with some kind of ghost story to help raise the spirits, so to speak, and make you all feel a little bit more optimistic about the whole subject of dying and the afterlife. Now, out of the many, many hundreds of stories that we researched for the Ghost Walk, there were, in my opinion, a good 2 or 3, perhaps a few more, that might do that job. But every week I tend to fall back on the same story, and this is why. Because during one of my very first Ghost Walks, a little girl came up to me. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old, barely old enough to even understand the Ghost Walk. But she came up to me and she tugged at the end of my sleeve, and with a face full of childlike innocence, she asked this question. "Please, sir, is there such a thing as a happy ghost?" Well, like many children's questions, that was very, very difficult to answer, particularly because of her age. However, I thought about it, and one story kept coming back to my mind. Now, unfortunately, at the age of 6 or 7, she wouldn't have understood it. So, for her, I had to come up with something else. But being as all of you tonight appear, at least physically, to be over the age of 6 or 7, I will tell it to you. Now, this story concerns part of old Nottingham known as Foreman Street. Now, if you're a visitor to our fair city, you can find Foreman Street by just going up to the Theatre Royal, crossing the road to your right and down the grand new MGM theatre and cinema complex, that little road down there, that is Foreman Street. And towards the end of the 1800s, Foreman Street had become yet another of Nottingham's very many, very diverse and very famous, or infamous, depending on your morals, red light districts. It was the place to get one's entertainment each and every night in Nottingham. And in the 1880s there lived on Foreman Street a young lady. A young lady of, how should I describe her? A young lady of horizontal recreation who went by the name of Miss Nellie Banks. Now, Nellie is recorded in local history. She was a definite Nottingham character, and she was very much in demand for her assets and abilities in her chosen career, and she plied her trade very successfully, thank you sir, from her house on Foreman Street. Now obviously in this day and age of the 21st century, young Miss Nellie Banks is long gone, but Nellie's house on Foreman Street still stands to this very day. That house is no longer lived in. That house, like many of the old houses in Nottingham City, is now a shop. And until very recently, that shop was entitled the Little London Herbal Stores, selling all kinds of herbal remedies, vitamins, food supplements, all that kind of healthy stuff we buy and leave mouldering in the cupboards and never actually get round to eating. Anyway, the gentleman who owned the Little London Herbal Stores also owned the entire building in which his shop was situated, both the ground floor where the shop was and the then abandoned upper floors. Now one evening around about 5:30, the proprietor of the shop went to his front door. He locked that front door and he turned the open sign round to close. But rather than wandering off home as he would normally have done at that time, he decided on this occasion that he was staying behind after hours. He was staying behind to begin preparing his accounts before handing them over into the truly chilling and terrifying grasp of the taxman. So he wandered back behind his counter, he made himself a coffee and sat down to begin the laborious task of going through the books. He continued working well into the hours of darkness with his task, until suddenly, at around about 9 o'clock that night, he was brought to attention. He was brought to attention by the very sudden and unexpected appearance of a sound which was being transmitted through into his shop from the empty, vacant room above it. Now this sound took the form of a very loud, repetitive and monotonously regular banging upon his ceiling. Now would that table like to tell me what they're giggling about, please? Anyway, the banging began very slowly at first. Bang, bang, bang. Slow though it was, it had a monotonous regularity to it. The proprietor of the shop sat back in his chair. He stared up at the ceiling as if to see something. But no, the banging continued. Bang, 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 booming out and echoing in his shop below. And the shopkeeper noticed that with each passing second, the space of time between each bang was becoming shorter. The banging was becoming faster. Whoever was up there making this banging noise was certainly getting more enthusiastic about its business, whatever that might turn out to be. Bang, bang, bang. Faster and faster the banging became, more furious, faster and faster. At some times it slowed down before powering back again with renewed enthusiasm and vigour as it pounded into the floor of the ceiling above his shop. At some times the percussive shock of the banging was enough to rattle the light fittings and shake the very contents of the shelves in the shop below. But no way could anybody be up there. The only way anybody could have got up there would be to have passed through 3 locked doors, up a flight of stairs, and indeed past the very shopkeeper who had been there all long that day. No way could anybody have done this, but still the banging continued, getting faster and faster and faster, until after about 3 to 4 minutes it stopped. As suddenly as it had begun, and all was plunged into silence again. It was around about then that the proprietor of the shop came up with a kind of thought which inevitably occurs to almost anybody who witnesses paranormal phenomena. That thought goes something like this: I'm off. And he was gone, as fast as his little legs would carry him. However, a couple of days later, the proprietor was obviously back in his shop doing his day-to-day business, and he was chatting to one of his regular customers about this strange phenomena. Now, as luck would have it, this regular customer turned out to be something of a local historian himself, and he was able to shed a little light about what had gone on in that shop when that shop was the home and business premises of one Miss Nellie Banks in the 1880s. So, ladies and gentlemen, for the final time tonight, let me drag you back in time. The year is 1884. In 1884, young Miss Nellie Banks is at the height of her prowess, plying her trade with some success from her home on Foreman Street. And at the same time that Nellie is at large, there is also an elderly gentleman who is a regular visitor to our fair city, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Justice Watkins Williams, and he is a High Court judge. Mr. Justice Watkins Williams will visit this city religiously once a month. During his stay, he will remain in the city for around about a week, and every day of the week you'll find Mr. Justice Watkins Williams presiding over the criminal courts in the Shire Hall, casting his judgment over all kinds of miscreants, footpad and criminals who come before him. The very courts in which he presided are still there to this day, in the place that you may now know as the Galleries of Justice, lovingly restored, even complete with a tasteful plastic model of the judge himself. Anyway, it so happens that in the month of July 1884, Mr. Justice Watkins Williams is back in Nottingham. After a hard day's sentencing at the courts, he returns back to his lodging house in the nicer part of the city, close to the criminal courts. As soon as he returns, he sits down and partakes of his evening meal, and after his evening meal, he turns to his personal butler and informs his butler that he has decided on this occasion to take a walk in the warm summer night air, to which his butler responds, "Of course, my lord, what an excellent idea, but please do remember your doctor's orders and don't go doing anything now which may put too much stress upon your poor old heart." So, with these sage words in mind, on the night of July the 16th, 1884, Mr. Justice Watkins Williams set out for his evening walk. However, local history has recorded that Mr. Justice Watkins Williams never managed to finish that walk, because a couple of hours later that night, the local police force, such as they were then, were rushed to the house of one Miss Nellie Banks on Foreman Street. And upon bursting into Nellie's bedroom, the police were very, very shocked and very dismayed to find the quite naked and quite dead corpse of Mr. Justice Watkins Williams lying spread-eagled on Nellie's bed with a curiously satisfied grin upon his old dead face. It would seem that the elderly judge had gone and done something which had put too much stress upon his poor old heart, whatever that may turn out to be. Well, the local police force immediately recognised the body of the High Court judge lying there, and at the same time they recognised the public scandal which could potentially be brewing. So, as they sometimes do, the police came up with a cunning plan. They decided that they would dress up the rapidly stiffening corpse. They would then lie it in the back of a cart and cover it with a blanket to obscure the body's identity. They would then run the body back across the city centre and leave it with the trusty butler, who could be relied upon to claim that the judge had died peacefully in his sleep that night, and thus all scandal would be averted. However, over the following week or so, the entire population of Nottingham does eventually learn how Mr. Justice Watkins Williams met his end, and it became affectionately known for some time thereafter as the Judge's Last Stand. And to finish that story, it must finish where it began. And that story, if you remember, for me at least, began with a little girl's innocent question, "Please, sir, is there such a thing as a happy ghost?" Well, it seems to me that the ghost of Mr. Justice Watkins Williams is now caught in what we in the trade refer to as a time trap, where his spirit is being forced to live out the circumstances that led to his death again and again for the rest of eternity. So if indeed there is such a thing as a happy ghost, then my money's on that old chap.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you've enjoyed your tour around the haunted streets of this wonderful city of Nottingham. But please do keep in touch with the Nottingham Ghost Walk, because we do hope to see each and every one of you on one of our future ghost events. If not in this life, then maybe in the next, who knows.